All right, and welcome to the fourth installment of this video series, explaining how to use views in Android, make custom views, basically. So, what we've got here in the fourth one is a view that we can click on, and when I click on it, it changes color, so it changes from blue to pink, and then when I release the click, it changes back to blue, but also we get we get an increment inside of here. So this is not a text view. This is not a button that is responding to button presses. This is its own custom view, completely self-contained, and the drawing mechanisms are completely defined within inside of this class. And we're going to go over those and how the sequence of how all this happens. So when I release, the count goes up, and every time I press, I basically get a new counter that's happening here. So how does this happen? So we'll start from the beginning. The package name up here, we've got custom views 04. The view is loaded when I call set content view, and I load in the activity main file from our layout resources. Go and open up activity main, and you can see that I call the package name and this class, the MyNewView class from within this package. And I do the default behavior of setting this up 150 pixels. I add a little margin over here. I set the primary to be that blue color. And then I use the app namespace to set the positioning of this view inside of the middle. So top and bottom, start and end are what allow this 150 by 150 dp view to sit right in the middle of the screen over here. So how does the actual logic of this stuff happen? So inside of MyNewView, I'm going to get rid of these other guys because MyNewView is really where the main stuff is happening. I'm going to introduce a couple new things here. The first thing is we're going to introduce this paint class. So I don't have handlers. That's not required inside of here, and it doesn't look like I'm doing logs. So what we've got is MyNewView. It extends view. And remember, I can make this MyNewView class by making a new Java class over here, specifying the inheritance. I do not need to import all of these statements. I've got a paint over here. I mean, obviously I do need to import them, but I don't need to type them in to import them. So what I can do is just press Alt-Enter and import the class, and then the classes get auto-imported for us over here. I'm using AOSP naming conventions over here, using this lowercase m for member. I have my default constructor that pulls from the context in the attribute set. I set my count to 0, and then I'm going to run this new method that you're going to see over here with these apps that tend to have custom canvases and custom drawing going on, and that's setup paint. So the basic work through over here is that I have a paint object, and you can think of the paint as being something like Microsoft Paint, like a little sketch pad, a bitmap, or you have vector control over it, but it's a canvas where you can draw on. And I have a custom method. Notice that this is not overridden. This is not an overridden method. This is just my own personal method that sets up the paint. I set mPaint to be a new paint class over here. And what I'm doing is setting the color of him to white. I'm setting anti-alias. Anti-alias allows for smoother drawing. That's a discussion for a later date, but it helps make the drawing smoother. And I set the text size. This is going to be 80 dp's, I believe. And you can sort of see that this text is going to be the text that shows up inside of here, inside of our view. And then I'm going to set the style to fill. So it's not going to be an outline or a border or anything like this. So we configured our paint object. We are going to reuse this paint object throughout all of the drawing events. So we've got one paint object. He's going to be reused over and over again. Now, when a touch event is received, so a touch events get called when I press down, and they're called for many reasons, right? Press with movement, release goes up. So an event is passed to this member method, passes the event over here, and I get the action, I get the type of action, and then I do a little switch over here where I ask, okay, are we pressing down or are we going up with this thing? If we're going down, I set the background color equal to our pinkish background color, and we can see that going over here. So when I press down, the color was set to pink, and when we release, the color gets set back to the default blue color over here. This color was loaded in from the resources, and the resources were defined in the values folder over here inside of colors. So we're using get resource, get colors, and we're asking for the color primary, and the color accent. And remember, R is referring to these resource files that are defined inside of here. And I could change these numbers around, and I could get different colors out of this. So increment and update is going to be called, we can see the color change going back and forth. That's fairly straightforward. But increment and update is my own custom method over here, which is going to be a little bit of something new for us. So what this guy's going to do with increment and update is it increments our count. This is our private count that we're keeping track of over here. So I have a count over here. This guy starts at 0 when the class is initialized. So I have a count that keeps track of how many button presses I've done. And then I run this method post invalidate. Post invalidate is very important and very interesting and not exactly intuitive. So it's important when to understand what post invalidate is actually doing. What post invalidate does is it sends a message to the Android GUI operating visual queue that says, hey, the current view for this app or this particular class is not valid, and you need to redraw this. So what it does is it queues up a message to say, hey, redraw the view that we've got over here. And what this allows is for efficient drawing resources to be handled throughout the entire Android operating system. So it's important to know that from Android's perspective, one of the most important things is that the GUI is responsive. You want to make sure that your app can always, or Android always wants to make sure that it can respond to user input. And so it doesn't want to do unnecessary draw cycles. And one of the ways that you can manage and prevent unnecessary draw cycles is only telling the app to draw when the current view needs a refreshing. So this post invalidate really means, hey, refresh the view. And so our view is only going to be redrawn when I release this button. Now, the draw method being on draw that's called over here. Obviously, there is some drawing that happens when I set the background, and that does change behavior. But inside of onDraw, basically post invalidate is going to say, hey, you need to call onDraw. And onDraw is the method that gets queued up inside of the operating system. So you want to make this computationally minimal. You don't want to add a lot of extra computations in here. You know, for me, we've got a couple divides and stuff like that. Like, obviously, this is not ideal if you wanted to have something that's running a lot, but for something that's called occasionally, having a couple calculations put into there is probably fine. So post invalidate means when you're available, Android, when you're available, go into my onDraw method. Great. So what it does in onDraw, when I release the button, message comes into here. So this onDraw is never, ever called directly. We get the display text, which is going to be their current value of count, starts off as 0. I figure out the width. So I measure the text. I measure this text over here. So I use this paint object that we initialized, and so the font size and stuff like that. I say, okay, let's figure out what the actual size is going to be of this text. Then I figure out the position that I want to actually place this. And so I'll leave it to you guys to investigate what these calculations actually render to, but this canvas is going to be the space. So this canvas is the size of our blue box over here, and it's effectively our blue box. And it gets the width of it, and it gets the height of it, and it figures out the height, and we figure out the offset to make sure to find the actual midpoint, the ascent and the descent, to find the midpoint of where this thing should be placed. And we are going to center this text, and then we tell the canvas. So the canvas is passed to onDraw to actually draw this text. Here's the text that it's going to draw. Here's the place it's going to draw, and here's the paint object that it's going to use to actually render this thing. So let's go through this now and see it again. I press the button. As soon as I press down, we go into this action down. I set the background color. Boom. So the background color is now down. When I release it, doom, we get thrown into action up. Gets called increment and update. Increment and update increments the count. It says, hey, Android, the current drawing on this screen is no longer valid. When you're ready to, queue up an onDraw onDraw goes through, it gets the new value of this count, it figures out the height. So I guess it's probably valid that I'm figuring out the height. You know, we could do something where the height is changing every single time inside of here. Sometimes I forget why I do things. And then we actually draw the text in the actual location. So using this paint object, remember the paint is going to define the color. So right, if I say like color dot green over here, right? So, and I redeploy this object, this paint is defining the color of that text. Let's install our APK and let's see, ooh, it's a nice little green 0. And so now we have lots of colors going on inside of here. And again, X position and Y position are still rendering. So you get a delightful little counter over here. And that's about it. So thank you very much.